The silence was the first thing that felt wrong. For William Wynne, a 90-year-old retired Navy SEAL with 3 decades of combat experience, silence usually meant one of two things: peace or an impending ambush. As he stepped onto the porch of his childhood home, his moss-green eyes narrowed, scanning the perimeter with the precision of a hawk. At Nummuy, William was a mountain of a man, tall, muscular, with broad shoulders that still carried the weight of his service. His salt and pepper Bayou Date cut and short, silver-streaked beard gave him the look of a seasoned lion. By his side stood Smoky, a bami-kilogram German Shepherd-Labrador mix. Smoky wasn't just a pet, he was a partner. With his black and tan fur and perfectly upright posture, Smoky's intelligent dark brown eyes were already fixed on the front door. The dog's ears, sharp and erect, twitched. William reached for the handle, his square-jawed face tightening. "Smoky, stay," he whispered, his voice a low, powerful rumble. Usually his mother would be at the window waving as soon as his truck pulled into the driveway. Today the curtains were drawn. The air felt heavy, charged with a tension William hadn't felt since his last tour in Syria. He pushed the door open, the floorboards groaning under his weight. The house was cold, too cold for a Tuesday afternoon. Then Smoky let out a low, guttural whine, a sound he only made when he detected a threat or a tragedy. William followed the dog's gaze toward the kitchen, and his heart, hardened by years of war, suddenly felt like it was being crushed by a cold fist. All stories presented on this channel are fictional and are creatively developed based on themes such as courage, loyalty, resilience, and the special bond between veterans and their dogs. There, slumped against the kitchen cabinet, was his mother. She wasn't moving. Her hand was pressed against her side, and even from the doorway William could see the distress in her shallow breathing. "Mum," he roared, his powerful legs eating up the distance in 2 strides. He knelt beside her, his rugged, sun-kissed skin pale with shock. He checked her pulse with steady fingers, his deep forehead wrinkles etching deeper into his brow. She had been hurt not by an accident, but by a deliberate act of violence. She had been struck down in her own home. As William stabilized her, his mind raced. Who would do this? His mother was a retired schoolteacher who spent her days gardening. Before he could spiral into rage, he felt a nudge on his shoulder. It was Smoky. The dog wasn't just comforting him, he was signaling. Smoky's long, strong muzzle was pointing toward the hallway leading to the basement. The dog's tail wasn't wagging. It was stiff, his body vibrating with intensity. Smoky had found something. Before we reveal what Smoky found hidden in the shadows, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more stories of heroism and justice to life. Now, back to William and Smoky. While the paramedics were on their way, William knew he couldn't just sit still. His SEAL training took over, analyze the environment, secure the perimeter, find the why. He looked at Smoky. "Show me, boy," he commanded. Smoky didn't hesitate. The dog trotted into the hallway, his paws clicking softly on the hardwood. He stopped at a specific spot near the coat closet, a place William had walked over 1,000 times as a child. Smoky began to scratch at the edge of a loose floorboard, his intelligent eyes darting back to William to ensure he was watching. William knelt, his broad shoulders blocking the light as he pried the board upward, his square jaw set firmly as he reached into the dark cavity. He expected to find old photos or perhaps some jewelry his mother wanted to keep safe. Instead, his fingers brushed against cold plastic. He pulled out a heavy waterproof satchel. Inside were 3 leather-bound ledgers and a series of encrypted flash drives. As he flipped through the first ledger, his moss-green eyes widened. These weren't household accounts. These were military logistics logs, specifically records of high-value assets and currency transports from his old Unit S operations in Syria. His breath hitched. These documents proved that millions of dollars meant for reconstruction had vanished into thin air. William stared at the names in the ledger. His hands, calloused from years of handling weaponry and heavy gear, shook slightly. There, at the bottom of every unauthorized transfer, was a signature he recognized all too well: Commander Miller. Miller had been William's superior officer for 5 years. He was a man William had once trusted with his life, a man who had been a mentor to him. But as William read further, the timeline became clear. His mother had discovered these files while helping archive some old military records for a local veterans charity. She had stumbled upon a digital trail that led straight to Miller's offshore accounts. She hadn't told William because she didn't want him to be in danger. She knew he had already given enough to the country. But Miller had found out she had the evidence. The accident in the kitchen was the robbery gone wrong. It was a message. It was an attempt to silence a witness before she could hand these papers to the authorities. William looked at Smoky, who stood guard at the door, his pointed ears alert for any sound from outside. The realization hit William like a physical blow. The man he once saluted was now the man who had tried to take the only family he had left. The sound of sirens grew louder in the distance, but William's focus was elsewhere. He noticed a faint rhythmic blinking coming from the tree line across the street. It was a reflection, the lens of a high-powered camera or a set of binoculars. They were being watched. Whoever Miller had sent to find the ledgers wasn't finished. They were waiting for the paramedics to leave so they could finish the job and retrieve the evidence. William's moss-green eyes turned icy. He was the same man Miller remembered. He was older, wiser, and he had Smoky. "They think we re an easy target, Smoky," William whispered, his voice like grinding stones. Smoky let out a soft, low growl, sensing his master shift in energy. William carefully tucked the ledgers into his own tactical bag. He wouldn't let the local police handle this yet. Miller had connections everywhere. This was a war that had followed him home from the desert, and if Miller wanted a fight, William was going to give him one he would never forget. But first he had to get his mother to safety without the Watchers knowing he had the files. He looked at the back exit, then at Smoky. It was time to disappear into the shadows and become the predator instead of the prey. The paramedics arrived, their red and blue lights reflecting off the deep wrinkles on William's forehead. He spoke to them with the calm, authoritative tone of a man used to giving orders in the heat of battle. While they tended to his mother, William remained a shadow in the corner of the room, his moss-green eyes never leaving the window. He knew the Watchers were still out there, lurking in the tree line. He couldn't let his mother go to the hospital alone, but he also couldn't lead the enemies straight to her. He leaned down to Smoky, whispering into the dog erect tan-trimmed ear. Smoky, scout the perimeter, back door. The Bami Kilo Gam dog moved with silent grace, his black and tan fur blending into the dim hallway. Smoky's posture was perfectly upright, his nose working the air for the scent of gun oil or cigarette smoke, the telltale signs of mercenaries. A moment later, Smoky returned with a sharp single nod of his head, his silent signal that the back way was clear. William helped the paramedics load his mother into the ambulance, but instead of following in his truck, he slipped into the back of the emergency vehicle with her. He needed to be invisible. As the ambulance pulled away, he saw a black SUV pull out of the shadows to follow his empty truck. The hunt had begun, but they were following a ghost. William didn't take his mother to the main city hospital. He knew Miller would have eyes there. Instead, he directed the paramedics, using a retired military ID and a voice that brooked no argument, to a private clinic run by an old combat medic friend. As his mother was wheeled into surgery, William sat in the waiting room, his muscular frame looking too large for the plastic chair. His square jaw was set so tight it looked like carved granite. Smoky sat at his feet, his intelligent dark brown eyes scanning every person who walked through the clinic door. William opened his laptop and inserted one of the flash drives Smoky had found. The encryption was sophisticated, standard military grade, but William hadn't just been a door kicker, he was trained in tactical intelligence. As the progress bar crawled across the screen, his moss-green eyes narrowed at the files popping up. It was to just stolen money. There were shipping manifests for classified equipment that had never reached the front line. Miller wasn't just a thief, he was a traitor selling high-tech assets to the highest bidder. William felt a surge of cold fury. The sun-kissed skin on his hands tightened into fists. He had bled for that equipment, and his brothers in arms had died protecting it. The clinic was quiet, the hum of the air conditioner the only sound until Smoky's ears suddenly pinned back. The dog let out a vibration more than a growl, a warning meant only for William's ears. William looked up. At the end of the long, sterile hallway, a man in a maintenance uniform was walking toward them. To a civilian, he looked ordinary. To William, the man's gait gave him away, the heavy, balanced stride of someone carrying a concealed weight on his hip. William didn't reach for a weapon. He did near to need one. He stood up, his broad shoulders casting a long shadow. "Smoky, heel," he commanded softly. They met the man halfway. As they passed, William intentionally brushed his shoulder against the technician. The impact was like hitting a brick wall. In that split second, William's practiced hands felt the outline of a radio and a badge. Not a mercenary. This was someone from a private security firm Miller likely owned. The man tried to turn, but Smoky was already behind him, a low, menacing rumble echoing in his chest. William leaned in close, his moss-green eyes boring into the man's soul. "Tell Miller he's moving too slow," William whispered. The man turned pale, realizing he was trapped between a seal and a predator. William let the man retreat. He wanted them to report back. He wanted Miller to know that the retired old man was still very much in the fight. Returning to his mother's bedside, he saw her eyes flutter open. She was weak, but she recognized him. She reached out, her hand trembling. "William, the books," she managed to whisper. "Mott have them, Mom." Smoky found them. He reassured her, his voice softening with an affection he rarely showed. She explained that she had seen Miller's name on a digital ledger while volunteering for the archives. When she started asking questions, Miller himself had called her, reminding her of the non-disclosure agreements her son had signed. It was a veiled threat that she had ignored. She had underestimated how far Miller would go to protect his secret. William realized the scale of the operation. It wasn't just one man. It was a network. The money stolen from Syria was being used to fund a private military company right here on American soil. Miller wasn't just hiding a crime, he was building an empire on the blood of his own soldiers. Knowing the clinic would soon be swarming with Miller's cleaners, William knew they had to move. He called in a final favor from his days in the teams. Within the hour, a nondescript van arrived to transport his mother to a secure, undisclosed location, a black site for retired operators. William watched the van disappear into the night, feeling a momentary sense of relief. Now he could stop running. Now he could go on the offensive. He looked down at Smoky, whose black and tan fur was ruffled by the night wind. The dog looked up at him, ready for the next command. "It's just us now, boy," William said, his square face hardening in the moonlight. He had the evidence, but he needed a way to broadcast it where Miller couldn't delete it. He needed to get to the regional data hub, and he knew Miller would be waiting there. William and Smoky are about to walk into the lioness den to expose the truth. Will they make it out in one piece? Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss the thrilling conclusion of this mission. If you're rooting for William and Smoky, give this video a like. Now, the real mission begins. In the quiet of a dimly lit garage, William Wynne prepared for the mission. This wasn't a standard military operation, it was personal. He pulled on a tactical vest that hugged his broad shoulders and muscular frame. His deep moss-green eyes were fixed on the reflection in a dusty mirror. At Nummy he saw the map of his life in the crow's feet and the deep forehead wrinkles, but his square-jawed face held a determination that hadn't aged a day. He ran a hand over his salt and pepper Bayou Det cut and trimmed his short-boxed beard. He looked like the veteran he was, rugged, seasoned and dangerous. Smoky stood by the workbench, his Bama kilo gam frame steady and his posture perfectly upright. The dog's black and tan fur seemed to absorb the shadows. William checked Smoky's tactical harness, ensuring the camera and communication link were secure. "We re-going in quiet, Smoky," William murmured, his voice a low, gravelly vibration. He didn't need a rifle. His greatest weapons were his mind, his experience and the dog at his side. He packed the encrypted flash drives and a specialized signal jammer. They weren't just going to fight, they were going to dismantle Miller's empire from the inside out. The regional data hub was a fortress of glass and steel guarded by a private security force that answered directly to Miller. To anyone else, it was impenetrable. To William, it was just a series of patterns. He watched from the perimeter, his moss-green eyes analyzing the patrol rotations. Beside him, Smoky remained motionless, his erect pointed ears twitching at the slightest sound of a distant engine or a heavy footstep. The dog's long, strong muzzle was tilted up, catching the scent of the facility's exhaust vents. "Find the vent, boy," William whispered. Smoky moved like a ghost through the tall grass. His German Shepherd-Labrador heritage gave him a unique blend of speed and scent tracking. He navigated the shadows with a precision that would put most human scouts to shame. He stopped a heavy iron grate near the cooling towers, his intelligent dark brown eyes looking back at William. It was the perfect entry point. William followed, his sun-kissed skin blending into the darkness. He used a specialized tool to silently pry the grate open. No alarms, no spotlights, they were inside. The interior of the hub was a labyrinth of server racks and cooling fans. The blue light of the monitor reflected off William's square jawline, highlighting the intensity of his gaze. Smoky led the way, his paws making no sound on the metal floor. Suddenly, Smoky stopped, his body vibrating with a low, silent warning. William flattened himself against a server rack. Around the corner, two security guards walked by, discussing their weekend plans. William's moss-green eyes narrowed. He recognized the emblem on their sleeves. It was the same private security firm from the clinic. He didn't move a muscle, his breathing controlled and shallow. His broad shoulders were tense but ready. As the guards passed, Smoky didn't bark or growl. He simply watched them with a predatory focus. Once the hallway was clear, William moved toward the central terminal. He didn't need to break down doors, he just needed a few minutes of digital access. He plugged in the signal jammer to create a localized dead zone for the security cameras. The plan was working. They were ghosts in the machine, moving through Miller's digital heart without leaving a trace. William reached the main server console, his calloused fingers moving across the keyboard with surprising speed. His deep forehead wrinkles deepened as he bypassed the initial firewalls. He wasn't just looking for the money anymore, he was looking for the why. As the data began to stream onto his portable drive, he found it. Miller wasn't just stealing reconstruction funds, he was using the money to facilitate the transport of illegal artifacts and technology out of the Middle East. The classified equipment William had seen in the manifests were actually ancient relics and restricted drone components. The scale of the betrayal was staggering. Miller was using his military status as a cover for a global smuggling ring. William's jaw tightened as he saw names of other high-ranking officials involved. It was to just one bad apple, it was a rotten orchard. Sosmoa suddenly nudged William's leg, his intelligent eyes fixed on the door. The dog's ears were forward, alerted to a sound William couldn't yet hear. "Almost done, boy," William whispered, his eyes scanning the progress bar. "Chinfun, chinlamfun, moktumfun cha." He pulled the drive, but as he did, the lights in the room shifted from cool blue to a pulsing, emergency red. "Intruder alert, Sector 4. A metallic voice echoed through the vents. The digital silence was over. William didn't panic. Panic was for amateurs. He looked at Smoky, whose perfectly upright posture remained unshaken despite the flashing lights and blaring sirens. "They've locked the main exits," William noted, his moss-green eyes scanning the room for an alternative. He knew Miller would be watching the monitors now, realizing that his past had finally caught up with him. William gripped his tactical bag, his muscular build ready for the physical exertion of an escape. They had the evidence, but the facility was now a maze of locked doors and rising security. He could hear the heavy boots of the security team echoing in the distance, getting closer. "Smoky, lead the way. Find the air scrubbers," William commanded. The dog took off, his black and tan fur a blur of motion. They had to navigate the ventilation system to get to the roof. It was a race against time, and Miller's men were closing in. William knew this was exactly where Miller wanted him trapped, but Miller had forgotten one thing. William Wynne was never more dangerous than when he was. The metal of the ventilation shaft was freezing, but the air inside was thick with the scent of ozone and urgency. William Wynne, despite his muscular Namiya Reo Lurde frame and broad shoulders, moved through the cramped space with the fluid grace of a shadow. Behind him, Smoky crawled with disciplined precision, his black and tan fur brushing against the galvanized steel. Every few feet William stopped, his moss-green eyes scanning the slats of the air grates below. He could see the flashlights of Miller's security teams sweeping the hallways, their voices echoing with frustrated commands. "They reblocking the stairwells," William whispered, the sound barely a breath. Smoky's erect, pointed ears twitched toward the sound of a heavy door slamming a few floors down. At Bami Kilogam, Smoky was the perfect size for this tactical retreat, large enough to be a formidable protector, yet agile enough to navigate the building's iron veins. William reached a vertical junction and began to climb, his powerful jawline set in a grim mask. He could feel the vibration of the facility's heavy machinery through the soles of his boots. They weren't just escaping a building, they were escaping a tomb that Miller had designed specifically for them. "William, you always were too smart for your own good," a voice crackled through the facility's internal intercom system. It was Miller. The voice was smooth, cultured, and entirely devoid of remorse. William stopped his climb, his sun-kissed, rugged skin illuminated by the red emergency lights. He leaned his head against the cold metal, his deep forehead wrinkles etched with a mixture of betrayal and focus. "You should have stayed retired, Wynne. You could have lived out your days in that little house with your dog. But you had to dig. You had to look at things that didn't concern." William didn't respond. He knew Miller was trying to bait him, trying to pinpoint his location through acoustic sensors. Beside him, Smoky's intelligent, dark brown eyes were fixed on William's face, waiting for the signal. The dog's posture was perfectly upright even in the confined space, his long muzzle twitching as he sensed William's rising internal heat. Miller continued, "Bring me the drive, William. We can still handle this like officers. Don't to make me do something we look both regret." William's moss-green eyes turned a darker shade of flint. He did need to speak. The ledgers in his bag were all the answer Miller was going to get. William kicked open the final vent grate and emerged onto the gravel-covered roof. The night air hit him like a cold wave, ruffling his salt and pepper buzz cut. He was 6 stories up, and the only way down was a service ladder that was already being swarmed by security guards below. He looked at Smoky. "No choice, boy, we go the hard way." William ran toward the edge of the roof where a heavy-duty construction crane sat idle. He grabbed a thick industrial cable, winding it around his gloved hand, and then secured Smoky's tactical harness to his own chest rig. With his broad shoulders taking the strain, William stepped off the ledge. It wasn't a fall. It was a controlled, high-speed descent. They blurred past the windows of the 5th and 4th floors. Inside, he saw guards scrambling toward the glass, their faces pale with shock. Smoky remained remarkably calm, his long, strong muzzle tucked against William's chest, his dark eyes watching the ground rush up to meet them. They landed in a crouch behind a row of shipping containers. William hit the quick release on Smoky's harness. "Move!" he hissed. They disappeared into the labyrinth of the shipping yard just as the first searchlights hit the spot where they had landed. They reached the perimeter fence, but William didn't head for his truck. He knew it would be fitted with a GPS tracker by now. Instead, he pulled out a burner phone and dialed a secure number. "Target is moving. Mott have the drive," he said. The voice on the other end was hesitant. "William, stay away from the local precinct. Miller's reach is longer than we thought. 3 of the deputies are on his private payroll. If you go to the cops, that evidence will vanish before it hits the scanner." William's square jaw tightened. He looked at the salt and pepper streaks in his short boxed beard reflected in a puddle. He was a man without a country in his own hometown. He looked at Smoky, who was standing guard, his ears pointed and alert to the sound of approaching sirens. The sirens weren't there to help, they were there to capture. If the law wanted to take it, Mott Luglung take it to the people, William decided. He knew an old pirate radio station operated out of a lighthouse 10 miles up the coast. It was the only place with a high-gain satellite uplink that Miller couldn't easily shut down without causing a federal incident. The trek to the lighthouse took them through the dense coastal woods. The terrain was treacherous, filled with jagged rocks and thick underbrush, but William's muscular build and military training made the miles melt away. Smoky led the way, his balmy kilo gam frame pushing through the brush, his black and tan fur acting as natural camouflage in the moonlight. Every few minutes they would crouch in the shadows as a black SUV cruised slowly along the nearby fire road, its rooftop searchlight cutting through the trees like a predatory eye. As they reached the base of the lighthouse, William paused to catch his breath. His deep forehead wrinkles were slick verkepte hot sweat and his moss-green eyes were weary but sharp. He looked at Smoky, who hadn't faltered once. The dog's upright posture was a beacon of strength for him. "Nearly there, partner," William whispered, scratching the dog behind his tan-trimmed ears. They were about to broadcast the truth to the world, but they both knew that once the send button was pressed, there would be no going. Miller would have nothing left to lose, and a man like Miller was most dangerous when he was backed into a corner. The lighthouse stood like a lonely stone sentinel against the crashing waves of the Atlantic. William Wynne pushed the heavy oak door open, his broad shoulders nearly filling the frame. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of salt, old iron, and ozone. "Elias, it's me," he called out, his voice a steady, powerful rumble that echoed up the spiral staircase. Smoky entered first, his Bami kilogram frame tense and his posture perfectly upright. The dog's black and tan fur was damp from the coastal mist, and his erect, pointed ears were constantly scanning for any sound other than the rhythmic roar of the ocean. From the top of the stairs, a grizzled man with a headset peered down. Elias, a former Navy communications officer who had long ago traded his uniform for a life of coastal solitude, nodded once. He didn't need an explanation. He saw the intensity in William's moss-green eyes and the deep forehead wrinkles that spoke of a mission that couldn't fail. William climbed the stairs, his muscular build showing the weight of the night's journey, yet his stride remained purposeful. He reached the lantern room, where a wall of monitors and radio equipment hummed. "Mott need the satellite uplink," Elias Williams said, his square-jawed face illuminated by the rotating beacon. "Mott have enough evidence to bring down a mountain, and Mott need the world to see it before Miller catches up." Elias moved verkepte hat practiced efficiency, his fingers flying across the vintage yet powerful console. "It's a high-gain signal, Will. Once we start the broadcast, Miller's tech teams will pinpoint this lighthouse in seconds. You relighting a fire in the middle of a dark field." William didn't blink. He pulled the encrypted drive from his tactical vest and handed it over. As the files began to upload, a progress bar appeared on the main screen. William stood by the window, his moss-green eyes fixed on the narrow access road that wound through the cliffs. Beside him, Smoky sat like a statue, his intelligent dark brown eyes watching the darkness. 20%, Elias announced, his voice tight. The lighthouse beacon swept across the landscape, momentarily illuminating the rugged, sun-kissed skin of William S. face and the silver streaks in his boxed beard. Suddenly, Smoky S. ears twitched. A low, guttural vibration started in the dog S. chest, not a bark but a warning. William followed Smoky's gaze. Far off in the distance, 3 pairs of headlights were moving fast, carving through the coastal fog. Miller wasn't sending a message anymore, he was sending a recovery team. William tightened the straps on his vest. He had to buy Elias 10 minutes. In the world of special operations, 10 minutes could be an eternity or a heartbeat. Elias, keep that data moving. Don't stop for anything, William commanded, his voice dropping into a low, tactical register. He descended the stairs with Smoky at his side, his muscular frame moving with the quiet efficiency of a predator. He didn't have a weapon, but he had the environment. He began securing the lower level, using heavy chains to bolt the main door and moving ancient iron weights from the old hoist system to block the entrance. His square jaw was set, and sweat beaded in the deep crow's feet around his eyes. Outside, the sound of tires screeching on gravel echoed through the salt air. The headlights cut through the fog, bathing the lighthouse in a harsh, artificial glare. William looked at Smoky. Hold the line, boy. Smoky stood in the center of the entry hall, his balmy kilogram frame looking larger in the shadows, his long, strong muzzle bared just enough to show his resolve. They weren't just protecting a lighthouse. They were protecting the truth that William's mother had nearly died for. The first heavy thud hit the door, vibrating through the stone walls. William didn't flinch. He adjusted his stance, his broad shoulders braced for the impact. He was a retired SEAL, but in this moment he was a son and a soldier fighting for the only thing that mattered: justice. The heavy oak door groaned under the pressure of a hydraulic ram, but it held. A voice boomed from a loudspeaker outside, a voice William knew better than his own. William, stop this. You were a decorated hero. Don't let your legacy end in a pile of rubble. It was Commander Miller. He wasn't hiding behind his men anymore, he was at the front. William climbed back up to the first floor gallery and looked down from the stone balcony. Miller stood by the lead SUV, his uniform pristine despite the salt spray. My legacy is tea for sale, Miller, William shouted back, his powerful voice cutting through the wind. I saw the ledgers. Mott saw what you did in Syria. You didn't just steal money, you stole the honor of every man who served under you. Miller's face, visible in the beam of the lighthouse, darkened. He gestured to his men, who began to surround the base of the tower. There were no guns drawn, not yet, as Miller knew a firefight would bring the Coast Guard too quickly. This was a siege of wills. William felt a nudge at his hand. It was Smoky. The dog-S dark brown eyes were calm, providing a silent anchor for William S. rising fury. 60%, Elias yelled from above. They were more than halfway there. The siege intensified as Miller S. men began scaling the lower windows using tactical ladders. William moved with lightning speed, using his muscular build to shove the ladders away, sending the attackers back to the rocky ground. He worked in perfect synchronization with Smoky. Whenever a hand appeared on a ledge, Smoky was there with a fierce, controlled snap that forced the intruder to retreat. The dog's upright posture and fearless defense were a testament to the bond they shared. However, the weight of the numbers was starting to tell. William S.'s sun-kissed skin was scraped and the deep forehead wrinkles were etched with the physical strain of holding back a dozen men. Suddenly, the lighthouse main power flickered and died. Miller had cut the lines. Elias! William roared. We re-on battery backup, Elias shouted back, his voice strained. But the upload speed just dropped by half. We need 5 more minutes. Below, William heard the sound of the main door finally splintering. The iron weights were shifting. The barrier was breaking. William looked at Smoky, then at the spiral stairs leading to the data. He knew what he had to do. He couldn't win a fight against 12 men in the dark, but he could lead them away from the signal. The lighthouse was plunged into a suffocating darkness, save for the rhythmic dying pulse of the emergency red lights. William Wynne stood at the base of the spiral staircase, his broad shoulders squared against the impending breach. He could hear the heavy breathing of Miller S. men as they crawled through the splintered remains of the front door. Smoky flanking position, William whispered. The balmy kilo-gam dog vanished into the shadows of the machinery room, his black and tan fur making him a ghost in the dim light. William didn't use a weapon, he used the darkness. As the first intruder stepped onto the cold stone floor, William moved with a speed that defied his numbing years. He used the man's own momentum to guide him into a wall, a silent and non-lethal neutralization. He felt the vibration of the stairs. More were coming. His moss-green eyes, sharp even in the low light, tracked the silhouettes. Beside him, Smoky was a silent guardian. Every time a guard tried to gain a foothold on the stairs, Smoky would emerge from the dark, a low, terrifying rumble in his chest that forced them back in fear. They weren't just fighting for a building, they were holding the line for the truth. Despite their best efforts, the sheer number of Miller's private security team forced William to retreat upward, step by step. He reached the lantern room just as Elias shouted, 95% Will, just a few more seconds. The door burst open, and Commander Miller stepped in. He was to the mentor William remembered. He looked tired, his eyes reflecting the desperation of a man whose empire was crumbling. Miller looked at William, the square jaw, the sun-kissed skin, the rugged defiance, and realized he couldn't buy this man. "Give me the drive, William," Miller said, his voice straining to remain calm. He stepped forward, but Smoky blocked his path. The dog's upright posture was a wall of muscle and bone, his intelligent dark brown eyes fixed on Miller's throat. Smoky didn't bark, he simply stood his ground, a perfect sentinel of justice. William stood beside his dog, his moss-green eyes locked onto his former commander's face. "It's over, Miller. You can kill a digital signal. The world is about to see who you really are." The tension in the room was a physical weight, thick enough to choke the air. The computer let out a sharp, final beep. "Upload complete," Elias breathed, leaning back in his chair with a look of pure relief. "It's out there, Will. Every major news outlet, every federal oversight committee, and every veteran-s forum has the ledgers." Miller froze, his face turning a sickly pale in the rotating light of the lighthouse beacon. He lunged for the console, but William stepped in his way, his muscular frame an immovable object. With a firm, controlled grip, William intercepted Miller's arm, pinning it with a strength born of decades of service. "You re a traitor to the uniform, Miller," William said, his voice a low, powerful rumble that seemed to vibrate the very glass of the lantern room. Outside, the sound of heavy-duty helicopter rotors began to drown out the crashing wave. Searchlights, real ones this time, bathed the lighthouse in brilliant white light. The Coast Guard and the FBI had arrived, alerted by the very data blast Elias had just sent. The watchers in the SUVs below were already being surrounded by federal tactical teams. The hunt was over, and the predator had finally become the prey. Federal agents stormed the lantern room, their boots echoing on the metal floor. Miller didn't fight back. The weight of the evidence had already crushed him. As he was led away in handcuffs, he stopped in front of. For a moment the two men, the veteran and the traitor, exchanged a look of profound silence. William's moss-green eyes held no hatred, only a deep, weary disappointment. He had seen the best and worst of humanity in the deserts of Syria, and today he had seen justice delivered at home. Smoky sat by William's side, his pointed ears alert as the agent secured the room. The dog's tail gave a single slow wag as he looked up at William, sensing the shift in his master's energy. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by the deep exhaustion of a mission accomplished. William ran a hand over his salt and pepper Bayou date cut, the deep forehead wrinkles finally softening. He looked out at the ocean, where the sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon. The long night was finally over, and for the first time in years, William felt like he could truly breathe. 1 week later, the sun was shining on the porch of the childhood home. William Wynne sat in a wooden chair, the deep crow's feet around his moss-green eyes crinkling as he watched his mother walk slowly but steadily across the garden. She was recovering, her strength returning a little more EOS day. Beside her, Smoky trotted happily, his Bami-kilogram frame a constant shadow of protection. The world now knew the truth about the stolen millions and the conspiracy that had reached into the highest levels of the military. Miller and his associates were facing life in prison. William looked down at his calloused hands, then at the dog who had saved his life and his mother's. Loyalty wasn't just a word to him. It was the black and tan fur of a partner who never wavered. He had lost a mentor but found a deeper purpose. As the wind rustled the trees, William stood up, his broad shoulders and muscular build silhouetted against the peaceful afternoon. He wasn't just a soldier anymore, he was a guardian. "Come on, Smoky," he called out, his voice warm and steady. "Let's go home." The hero and his dog walked into the house, leaving the shadows of the past behind them for a future built on.
The Channel, the Dog, and the Veteran is a storytelling platform created for entertainment, inspiration, education, and the promotion of positive emotional values. All stories presented on this channel are fictional and are creatively developed based on themes such as courage, loyalty, resilience, and the special bond between veterans and their dogs. The content does not represent real individuals, actual events, or documented cases. Any resemblance to real people, animals, or events is purely coincidental.